Timothy Allen, and today we're going to talk about what's called contingency management, or as I like to define it, my emergency theory about addiction. So, in addiction, there are certain things that come up that make people more likely to use drugs. Things like running into somebody who you used to use with, running into an old dealer, finding drugs in a coat pocket or a drawer. These are the sorts of things that occur. Now, I can't tell you when they'll occur, but I can tell you that if you're in recovery, this is something that's very likely to happen. And so my emergency theory on this comes from when I used to work on an ambulance as an EMT. And basically, what I realized as an EMT is that every day I went to work, there were certain things that were very likely to happen. Almost every day we'd have somebody who had chest pain. Almost every day we'd have somebody with a shortness of breath. We'd have somebody who fell down. We'd have somebody who was in a car accident. These are things that happened with regularity. I couldn't tell you what order or what time, but I could tell you that they're very likely to happen. In the same way, when you're dealing with addiction, there are certain things that are going to happen with regularity, and so preparing ahead of time helps. The other thing that occurs with emergencies is that preparation helps. One of the things that I find very interesting is that if people have never opened an emergency exit, they are very likely to run past the emergency exit in an emergency and get themselves hurt. However, people who open the emergency exit once are much more likely to use it in an emergency. So practicing things ahead of time makes a big difference. This is why when we teach people CPR, we give them a dummy and we have them practice and physically do it. And I can tell you, as someone who's done CPR, the first time I did CPR at 18 years of age, having done my training, that training really kicked in, and that preparation and learning how to position the head and learning how to do compressions. All of that really made a difference in doing these things. And I found that in other emergency circumstances, going through the process of having done things before is really helpful. So in addiction, what I like people to do is look at the things that cause trouble and be prepared for them. So, for instance, if you run into somebody who you used to use with, I always recommend that you start the conversation and you say, "Hey, how are you doing? I'm in recovery." Now, if the person says, "Great, you're in recovery, I'm in recovery," that's great. I'm glad to hear it. Terrific, you can keep on talking. If they're like, "Hey, what are you doing this weekend?" You go, "You know what? I've got something to do. I'll talk to you later," and you walk away. The reason for that is that your first reaction is the strongest, and having a planned exit is really helpful. What you're doing with the first statement is you're saying in a very kind way, "I don't want to know what's in your pocket. I'm in recovery. Don't try and give me something." Number two, if you want to talk about things like plans and stuff like that, but you're not mentioning recovery, I don't want to be a part about that. It's much easier to refuse if you have a specific object that you need to go to. Say, "I've got an errand, I've got a plan, I've got to be somewhere." And that allows you to step away. And practicing this, talking about refusal skills, will make you much more effective when these things happen. If you think about things like finding a baggie in a pocket or in a drawer or those sorts of things, I want you to think about running down the floor, the hallway, throwing it in the toilet, flushing it, put your hands up and celebrate, and how you're going to do that. Do not hold it and look at it and stroke it and pet it and think about it, because the longer you do that, the more likely you are to fail. So this is a concept called contingency management. That's the grown-up fancy term. I always call it emergency management, my emergency theory. But understanding these things and making plans, making a list of people you're going to call if you're stressed and you're overwhelmed, and calling them ahead of time and saying, "Hey, I've got you in my list. Can I include you as someone I can call when I'm in trouble?" And that process of calling them ahead of time makes it so much easier to call them when you do need it. And putting these things ahead of time allows people to find greater success. So I hope that's helpful for you today. If you have more questions about these sorts of things, or you need help to try and deal with an addiction, we're always happy to see you in the office, and I hope you have a nice day.